Mud caked the worn work boots of the old farmer standing in the center of the polished marble lobby, looking every bit like a man defeated by the earth. The loan officer smirked, seeing only a desperate beggar pleading for pennies to save a dying legacy. Rehearsing a swift rejection, the arrogant banker prepared to laugh this dust-covered relic right out of the air-conditioned building. But then, those manicured fingers typed in the 9-digit account number. The smirk vanished. Ethan's Fincon turned the key of his 1998 Ford F250, the engine sputtering with a heavy, wet cough, before finally dying out in the pristine parking lot of the Midwest Liberty Trust building. The silence that followed was suffocating. Outside the cracked window of his truck, the downtown financial district of Des Moines hummed with a sterile, efficient energy. Sleek, imported sedans and dark luxury SUVs glided into reserved parking spaces, driven by men and women in tailored wool and sharp silk. Ethan sat in the cab for a long moment, his large, calloused hands resting on the worn steering wheel. He was 71 years old, and every one of those years was carved deep into the lines of his sun-beaten face. His knuckles were swollen with decades of arthritis, his fingernails permanently stained with the dark, rich topsoil of Madison County. He wore his good clothes, a pair of stiff, dark denim jeans that had only been washed a handful of times, a plaid flannel shirt buttoned all the way up to his weathered neck, and a faded canvas jacket that still smelled faintly of diesel fuel and damp hay. He didn't belong here. He knew it. The security guard eyeing his truck knew it, and the imposing glass facade of the bank seemed to reflect it back at him. But Ethan's had no choice. The sky back home had been cruelly blue and cloudless for far too long. The drought of the past 2 seasons had devastated his corn and soybean yields. To make matters worse, his primary combine harvester, a massive aging beast of green machinery, had finally thrown a rod, its engine block cracking under the strain of the hardened, dry earth. Without a working combine, the meager crop he did manage to grow would rot in the fields. Without a harvest, the property taxes wouldn't get paid, and if the taxes weren't paid, the Fincon family farm, a plot of land that had been in his bloodline for 4 generations, would be auctioned off to the highest corporate bidder. He reached into the breast pocket of his flannel shirt and patted the soft, worn leather of his wallet. Inside was a piece of paper his late wife, Margaret, had given him just days before she passed away from a relentless battle with pancreatic cancer 3 years ago. She had handled the back office of the farm, the ledgers, the taxes, the small investments. She had pressed a folded piece of yellowed stationery into his palm, her hands terrifyingly frail. "If the dirt ever dries up, Ethan's," she had whispered, her voice barely a breath. "If the bank ever comes knocking with their teeth bared, you take this to them. Don't look at it, just give it to them." For 3 years, he hadn't needed it. He had scraped by. But today, the dirt had dried up. Stepping out of the truck, Ethan's felt the familiar ache in his lower back. He adjusted his worn cap, shutting the heavy door of the Ford. He walked toward the towering entrance of Midwest Liberty Trust, his boots leaving faint, dusty footprints on the pristine concrete. The automatic glass doors slid open, hitting him with a blast of aggressively cold, pine-scented air. The lobby was a cathedral of modern finance. Vaulted ceilings, massive pillars of gray marble, and a vast floor of polished granite stretched out before him. The echo of his heavy, rubber-soled work boots squeaking against the floor drew immediate attention. Conversations hushed. A few tellers glanced up from their monitors, their expressions a mix of confusion and mild distaste. Ethan's approached the main reception desk. A young woman with immaculate blonde hair and rimless glasses looked up at him. Her name tag read, Clara. She did not smile. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her tone carrying that specific, practiced polite chill reserved for those deemed unimportant. She subtly leaned back in her ergonomic chair, as if the smell of the farm might leap across the mahogany desk and stain her blouse. "I need to see a loan officer," Ethan said, his voice a deep, gravelly rumble that hadn't been used much since Margaret died. "Name's Ethan's Fincoln." Clara clicked her manicured nails against a sleek keyboard. "Do you have an appointment, Mr. Fincoln? Our commercial and agricultural lending officers are heavily booked today." "I don't have an appointment," Ethan's replied steadily, planting his feet firmly on the marble. "But I've held a mortgage with this institution since it was called Oak Creek Community Bank, back before you folks bought 'em out. I reckon that affords me a few minutes of someone's time." Clara sighed, a tiny exhalation of annoyance. "Take a seat in the waiting area, please. I will see if Mr. Whitmore has a cancellation." Ethan's nodded once, turning toward a row of plush, white leather chairs. He sat down carefully, feeling absurdly out of place. He watched the digital ticker tape on the wall, flashing stock symbols and red and green numbers, a language completely alien to a man whose entire life was governed by the almanac, the rain, and the first frost. He waited for 45 minutes, watching the young bankers walk briskly back and forth with their coffees and their tablets. He felt the weight of his age, the heavy sinking feeling that the world had spun too fast, leaving him and his kind behind in the dust. Finally, Clara called his name. "Mr. Whitmore will see you now. Suite 402. Take the elevators to the left." Ethan stood, his knees popping loudly in the quiet lobby. He walked to the elevator, the sinking feeling in his gut growing heavier. He was walking into the belly of the beast, armed with nothing but a desperate need for a $75,000 equipment and seed loan, and a mysterious piece of paper from a ghost. Suite 402 was an office designed to intimidate. It sat on the corner of the 4th floor, featuring floor-to-ceiling glass windows that overlooked the bustling city below. The desk was a massive slab of dark walnut, devoid of any paper, holding only a high-end laptop, a minimalist stainless steel lamp, and an expensive crystal decanter. Sitting behind the desk was Preston Whitmore. Preston was barely 35, with slicked-back dark hair, a custom-tailored charcoal suit, and a Swiss watch that cost more than Ethan's truck. He was the junior vice president of agricultural lending, a title that was deeply ironic, considering Preston had likely never stepped foot in a muddy field in his entire life. He was a man of spreadsheets, risk algorithms, and aggressive corporate restructuring. When Ethan's walked in, Preston was staring intently at his monitor. He didn't look up for a full 2 minutes. Ethan stood in the doorway, recognizing the power play for exactly what it was. He didn't fidget. He just stood there, a silent, immovable mountain of weathered flannel and bone. "Take a seat, Mr. Fincoln," Preston finally said, waving a hand toward the designer chairs opposite his desk without breaking his gaze from the screen. Ethan sat down, The chair was low, forcing him to look up at the banker. "I see here that you are from Madison County," Preston began, finally closing his laptop and lacing his manicured fingers together. He looked Ethan's up and down, his eyes lingering on the dried mud on Ethan's boots. A faint sneer curled the corner of Preston's mouth. "We don't get many traditional operators down here in the corporate branch. Usually, small-time accounts are handled over the phone. What brings you to Des Moines?" "I need an extension on my operating line and an equipment loan," Ethan said, his voice flat, refusing to be baited by the condescension. $75,000. Need to rebuild the engine on my combine and buy drought-resistant seed for the upcoming planting season. Preston sighed dramatically, reaching out to tap a few keys on his keyboard. A file appeared on his secondary monitor. He scrolled for a few seconds, his sneer deepening into a look of genuine pity. The kind of pity that is infinitely more insulting than outright anger. "Ethan's," Preston said, dropping the formal Mr. Fincoln in a calculated move of disrespect. "Let's be frank. I'm looking at your yields over the past 5 years. They are, to put it mildly, abysmal. You are operating a 400-acre independent farm in an era where economies of scale dictate that anything under 3,000 acres is a hobby, not a business." "It ain't a hobby," Ethan said, his jaw tightening. "It's my life. It's been my family's life since 1892. The soil is good. We just hit a bad stretch of weather. Weather is a variable we account for in our risk models," Preston shot back smoothly. "What we cannot account for is outdated methodology, aging machinery, and a complete lack of secondary collateral. You already have a second mortgage on the farmhouse. Your land is currently appraised at a value that barely covers your existing liabilities, especially given the soil depletion noted in the county surveys." Ethan's gripped the armrests of his chair. "I just need enough to get the crop out of the ground this year. The forecasts are predicting a wet spring. We'll bounce back." Preston leaned back in his chair, a dry, cold chuckle escaping his lips. It wasn't a laugh of humor. It was the laugh of an executioner amused by a condemned man's plea. He laughed at the sheer, naive audacity of the old man sitting before him. "A wet spring," Preston mocked gently, shaking his head. "Ethan's, do you know how many times I hear that? Just one more season. Just one good rain." Farming is no longer about praying for rain, old man. It's about data analytics, GPS-guided autonomous machinery, and corporate backing. The days of the family plot are dead. They've been dead for a decade. You're just refusing to read the obituary. Ethan's felt a hot flash of anger rise in his chest, a fierce protectiveness over the land that held the sweat of his father, his grandfather, and the ashes of his beloved Margaret. "I ain't asking for a handout, son. I'm asking for a loan. I've paid my debts to this bank for 40 years. "To Oak Creek Community Bank, perhaps," Preston corrected, his voice hardening into absolute ice. "But Midwest Liberty Trust is a different animal. We don't lend on sentimentality. We lend on solid asset backing. And right now, Ethan's, you have nothing. In fact, looking at these numbers, I'll be passing this file over to our foreclosure department by the end of the quarter if your arrears aren't caught up. I cannot, in good conscience, authorize a single cent for this loan." Preston stood up, buttoning his suit jacket, the universal corporate signal that a meeting was over. My advice? Sell the land. There's a subdivision developer buying up parcels in Madison County. They'll bulldoze the farmhouse, but you might walk away with enough to pay off your debts and afford a nice, quiet apartment in town. Have a good day, Ethans. Ethans didn't stand. He sat perfectly still, staring at the arrogant young man behind the desk. The silence in the office grew heavy, thick with the unsaid tension of two completely different worlds colliding. I said, "We are done here, Ethans," Preston reiterated, his tone shifting from dismissive to openly irritated. He reached for his desk phone to call security. "Please see yourself out before I have you escorted." Ethan slowly took a deep breath, the air whistling slightly through his weathered nostrils. He reached into his flannel pocket. He didn't pull out a weapon, though Preston flinched slightly as if he might. Instead, Ethans pulled out his old, battered leather wallet. His thick, shaking fingers fumbled for a moment before he withdrew the folded piece of yellowed stationery. He looked at it. It was completely blank on the outside, soft and frayed at the edges from years of sitting in the dark of a safety deposit box, and then in his pocket, Margaret's final safeguard. "My wife," Ethans began, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a quiet, dangerous weight. "My wife Margaret handled our secondary accounts. Before your massive corporation swallowed up the local branches, she set something aside. She told me to bring this to you if the wolves ever came to the door." Preston rolled his eyes, dropping his hand from the phone. "What is that? A savings bond? An old life insurance policy for $5,000? Ethans, I told you, it won't make a dent in the collateral requirements." Ethans ignored him. He leaned forward, laying the small piece of paper gently on the center of Preston's immaculate walnut desk. He unfolded it. Written in Margaret's elegant cursive handwriting was a 9-digit routing number and a 12-digit account number. Nothing else. "Look it up," Ethans commanded. It wasn't a request. Preston stared at the old man, a mixture of annoyance and faint curiosity crossing his features. "Fine. If it will get you to leave my office, I will humor you." Preston sat back down, aggressively pulling his laptop closer. He opened the bank's legacy mainframe portal, a cumbersome system used to access accounts from Bank's Midwest Liberty Trust had absorbed over the years. "Routing number," Preston muttered, typing rapidly. "Account number, let's see, probably an old Christmas Club account with a few $100 in it." He hit the enter key. The screen flashed. A prompt appeared. "Legacy account security override required. Please enter executive credentials." Preston frowned. "That's odd." The system only demanded executive credentials for accounts that were flagged for extreme privacy, usually corporate trusts or high-net-worth individual portfolios. He typed in his junior vice president override code, assuming it was a glitch in the old Oak Creek system. The screen lagged. A small loading hourglass spun on the screen. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Ethans watched Preston's face. He didn't know what was on that paper. He only knew that Margaret was the smartest woman he had ever met, a woman who read the Wall Street Journal while he read the Farmer's Almanac. Suddenly, the data populated on Preston's screen. Preston stopped breathing. His eyes, previously narrowed with contempt, widened to the size of saucers. He blinked hard, leaning so close to the monitor his nose almost touched the glass. He reached up, his hand trembling slightly, and took off his expensive blue light glasses. He rubbed his eyes and looked again. The name on the account read, Margaret and Elias Farnsworth, Blind Trust. Beneath it was the balance. It wasn't $50. It wasn't $50,000. The available liquid balance read $14,285,601.45. Preston's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He swallowed hard, a sudden cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. His arrogant demeanor shattered instantly, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. He quickly clicked into the account history, his mind racing to comprehend what he was seeing. How? How could this man, who looked like he had just crawled out of a ditch, have $14 million sitting in a liquid trust? Preston frantically scanned the transaction history. Decades ago, back in the late 1980s, an obscure telecom startup had approached the Fincolns to lease a useless, rocky ridge on the far edge of their property to build a regional relay tower. Instead of taking a flat monthly lease rate, Margaret had insisted on a tiny fraction of stock options in the company in lieu of standard payment, tying the lease to the company's growth. That startup eventually merged, and merged again, becoming one of the largest telecommunications giants in the world. The stock had split dozens of times. The dividends had automatically reinvested for 40 years into this blind trust, untouched, growing exponentially while Ethan's worked the dirt, completely oblivious to the empire his wife had quietly built in the background. Preston looked slowly up from the screen. The old man was still sitting there, hands resting on his knees, his expression utterly unchanged. The silence in the office was no longer heavy with Preston's arrogance. It was suffocating with Preston's dread. He had just laughed in the face of, patronized, and threatened to foreclose on a man who had enough liquid capital in a single account to buy the entire downtown branch of Midwest Liberty Trust and fire everyone in it. Well, Ethan's asked, his gravelly voice slicing through the thick silence of the office. Is there enough collateral for my $75,000 loan, son? Preston's throat clicked audibly as he tried to speak. The expensive crystal decanter on his desk suddenly seemed very small, and his tailored suit felt entirely too tight. For a full minute, the only sound in Suite 402 was the faint, rhythmic hum of the high-end air conditioning unit and the shallow, erratic breathing of Preston Whitmore. The junior vice president of agricultural lending looked as though all the blood had been siphoned from his body, leaving his face the color of wet chalk. His eyes remained locked on the monitor, tracing the commas and the decimal point of the $14 million balance over and over again, silently begging the digital display to reveal itself as a cruel, system-wide error. But it wasn't an error. The encrypted security protocols of Midwest Liberty Trust did not make mistakes of this magnitude. The money was real, it was liquid, and it belonged entirely to the man sitting across from him in mud-caked boots. Ethan's watched the transformation with a quiet, hardened satisfaction. Inside his chest, his heart was beating a heavy, chaotic rhythm. $14 million. The number was too large to fully comprehend, too abstract for a man who had spent his entire life calculating success in bushels per acre and the price of diesel per gallon. Margaret had always been smart, fiercely so, but this was a miracle forged in silence. He remembered the telecom men coming around in 1988, their shiny suits and their grand promises. He had wanted to run them off the property. Margaret had told him to go fix the tractor and let her handle it. She had traded a rocky, useless half-acre of limestone ridge for a sliver of an empire, and then she had buried the secret deep, letting it grow like winter wheat beneath the snow. "I'll ask you again, Mr. Whitmore," Ethan said, his voice remaining terrifyingly calm, devoid of any gloating or malice. "Does my account meet the bank's collateral requirements for a $75,000 equipment loan, or do you still need to pass my file to the foreclosure department?" The words broke Preston's paralysis. He jerked his head up, a sickening, desperate smile fracturing his terrified expression. He hurriedly shoved his blue light glasses back onto his face, attempting to rebuild the shattered facade of his authority, but his hands were shaking so violently that the frames clattered against his cheekbone. "Mr. Fincoln, Ethan's. I apologize," Preston stammered, his polished, condescending corporate drawl evaporating entirely. His voice cracked, sounding like a teenager caught in a lie. "There seems to have been a massive oversight on my part. The legacy systems, they don't automatically cross-reference with our current risk assessment models. I was entirely unaware of this trust." "You didn't look," Ethan stated plainly. "You saw the dirt on my jeans, and you made up your mind. You told me the days of the family plot were dead. You told me to sell my land to a developer. I was merely looking at the standard operating accounts," Preston babbled, desperately clicking out of the account screen as if hiding the number would make the situation less volatile. He wiped a bead of sweat from his upper lip with the back of his trembling hand. "A man in your position, a high net worth individual, you shouldn't be dealing with standard commercial loans anyway. This completely changes the paradigm of our relationship." "Our relationship," Ethan's echoed. The phrase tasted sour in his mouth. Yes, absolutely," Preston continued, his words tumbling out in a frantic rush. He stood up, but not with the commanding dismissal from before. He was hunched, placating, leaning over the desk as if trying to bridge the massive chasm he had just dug. "With these kinds of assets, Ethan's, we can offer you premium lines of credit at a fraction of a percent. We can have the $75,000 transferred into your checking account before you even leave this building. Frankly, we can finance a fleet of new combines for you. Brand new John Deeres, top of the line, whatever you need." Ethan's looked at the frantic young man. He didn't feel victorious. He felt a profound, exhausting sadness. If Margaret hadn't possessed the foresight of a Wall Street titan, this boy would have happily stripped Ethan's of his dignity, his home, and his heritage, all while checking his expensive Swiss watch. "I don't want a fleet of combines," Ethan said, his voice dropping to a low, rough whisper that forced Preston to lean in. "I want the parts to fix the one I have. It's a good machine. It just needs a little work. And I want the seed to plant my fields. And I think I'm done talking to you." Preston swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing sharply. "Ethan's, please, let me rectify this. If you withdraw or move these funds or file a complaint regarding my initial assessment, it would be catastrophic for my department. Catastrophic for my career," was what he really meant. Ethan slowly placed his weathered hands on the arms of the chair and pushed himself up. His joints popped, a harsh sound in the quiet room. He towered over the desk, casting a long shadow over Preston Whitmore. "I want to speak to the man who owns this desk," Ethan said, pointing a thick, calloused finger at the walnut wood. "Not the junior vice president, not the teller downstairs. I want the man who runs this bank. You go fetch him, son, and tell him Ethan's Fincoln is waiting." Preston didn't argue. He practically tripped over his own expensive leather shoes as he scrambled out from behind the desk, nearly jogging to the heavy glass door of the suite. He threw one panicked look back at Ethan's before disappearing down the carpeted hallway. Ethan stood alone in the office. He walked slowly over to the floor-to-ceiling window. Down below, the city of Des Moines moved like a colony of ants. He thought of his farm, the quiet rustle of the dry stalks in the wind, the smell of the impending rain that the weathermen kept promising. He reached into his pocket and touched the soft leather of his wallet. "You saved us, Maggie," he thought, closing his eyes against the glaring afternoon sun. "You always did know how to save us." 10 minutes later, the door to the office clicked open. Ethan's turned to see Preston holding the door for a much older man. This man did not look panicked. He looked calculating. He wore a navy blue suit that hung flawlessly on his frame, his silver hair impeccably styled. He projected an aura of absolute, unshakable control, the kind of control that came from decades of managing billions of dollars. "Mr. Fincoln," the older man said, stepping into the room with his hand extended. His smile was warm, practiced, and entirely fake. "I am Gregory Henderson, the Senior Managing Director of Midwest Liberty Trust. Preston here just brought me up to speed on the miscommunication regarding your portfolio. Please, sit down. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water? We have an excellent single malt scotch in the executive lounge." Ethan's ignored the extended hand. He remained standing by the window. Gregory seamlessly converted his rejected handshake into an adjustment of his tie, his smile never wavering. He shot a withering, microsecond glare at Preston, who was hovering nervously by the door. "Close the door, Preston," Gregory commanded softly, "and leave us." Preston nodded frantically, backing out of the room and pulling the heavy door shut, leaving Ethan's alone with the man who pulled the strings. Gregory walked around the desk, but didn't sit in Preston's chair. Instead, he leaned against the front of the walnut slab, attempting to position himself on Ethan's level, creating a false sense of intimacy. "I want to personally apologize for how you were treated today, Ethan's," Gregory began, his tone soothing and deeply resonant. "Preston is young. He relies far too heavily on algorithms and surface-level data. He failed to see the whole picture. He failed to see the man behind the account. That is entirely unacceptable at Midwest Liberty Trust." "He saw exactly what he was trained to see," Ethan's replied, his gaze unwavering. "He saw an old farmer with dirt on his boots and a dying crop, and he figured I was easy prey. He was ready to carve up my land before I even sat down." Gregory sighed, a perfectly executed sound of corporate contrition. "The agricultural sector has been challenging lately. The risk models are unforgiving. But those models do not apply to you, Mr. Fincoln. You are not a standard commercial client. You hold a Tier 1 blind trust with assets exceeding $14 million. That makes you one of the most valued private clients in this entire region." Ethan's crossed his arms over his chest. "That money belongs to my late wife. She set it up. I didn't even know it was there until an hour ago." A flicker of genuine surprise crossed Gregory's polished face, quickly masked by professional curiosity. "A hidden inheritance? Well, that is quite the revelation, and a testament to her financial acumen. The rooting history shows the initial seed came from telecom options in the late 80s. Brilliant, frankly, simply brilliant." Gregory took a step closer, adopting the tone of a trusted confidant. "Now that you are aware of these assets, Ethans, you are at a crossroads. Keeping $14 million completely liquid in a blind trust is safe, yes, but it is deeply inefficient. Inflation is eating away at your purchasing power every single day. What you need is an aggressive, diversified wealth management strategy. We can move these funds into municipal bonds, high-yield dividend portfolios, perhaps some commercial real estate trusts. We can turn that 14 million into 20 million within 5 years. And of course, we will immediately process a zero-interest line of credit for whatever your farm requires. We can handle everything for you." Ethans listened to the pitch. It was smooth. It sounded logical. It sounded exactly like the kind of language that had built this marble tower. But Ethan's Fincoln didn't trust men who spoke in percentages and portfolios. He trusted things he could touch. He trusted the soil, the changing of the seasons, and the solid weight of a wrench in his hand. "You want to manage my money," Ethan said flatly. "We want to partner with you," Gregory corrected smoothly. "We want to ensure your family's legacy is protected for generations to come. My family's legacy is the 400 acres of dirt in Madison County," Ethan said, his voice hardening. "Not some numbers on a screen." Ethans walked slowly back to the center of the room. He looked at the crystal decanter, the sleek laptop, the sweeping view of the city. He realized that this room, this entire building, was built on leverage. It was built on the backs of men like him who came in desperate, and men like Gregory who knew exactly how to squeeze them. "An hour ago," Ethan said, turning his gaze back to the senior managing director, "your boy Preston told me my farm was dead. He laughed at me. He told me to sell it to developers so they could bulldoze my farmhouse. Now, you want to partner with me." Gregory held his hands up defensively. "I assure you, Preston will face severe disciplinary action for his lack of tact." "It ain't about tact," Ethans interrupted, his voice finally rising, echoing slightly in the large office. "It's about what you people are. You're vultures. You circle when it's dry, waiting for us to drop. You don't care about the land. You don't care about the food we put on your tables. You only care about the collateral." Gregory's practiced smile finally faltered. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by the cold, calculating stare of a cornered executive. "Mr. Fincoln, I am trying to rectify the situation. What is it that you want?" Ethans uncrossed his arms. He stood taller, feeling the aches in his back fade away, replaced by a surge of righteous adrenaline. "I came here for a $75,000 loan," Ethan said, "but I reckon I don't need your money anymore. I've got my own." Gregory Henderson stiffened. "You are, of course, free to utilize your funds as you see fit. But making a rash decision regarding a $14 million trust out of anger over a junior officer's mistake would be highly ill-advised." "I ain't angry," Ethan said, though the steel in his eyes suggested otherwise. "I'm awake. Ethan's walked over to the desk and tapped his thick finger on the polished walnut. "Call your boy Preston back in here. He's going to do some typing for me." Gregory hesitated, then walked to the door and opened it. Preston was pacing in the hallway. He hurried back in, looking like a man walking to the gallows. "Sit down," Ethan's commanded. Preston looked at Gregory, who gave a curt, tight nod. Preston scrambled into his chair and opened his laptop. "Access the trust," Ethan's ordered. Preston's hands shook as he typed in his credentials, his eyes darting nervously between the screen and Ethan's. "I'm in." "Good," Ethan said. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his back pocket, not the one Margaret gave him, but a crumpled, oil-stained invoice sheet from his truck. He unfolded it and laid it on the desk. "I want you to initiate a wire transfer." To another account within Midwest Liberty?" Preston asked hopefully. "No," Ethan said. "To the Madison County Farmers Credit Union." Gregory took a step forward, alarm finally breaking through his composed exterior. "Mr. Fincoln, transferring funds of that magnitude to a small-town credit union is highly irregular. They won't have the infrastructure to manage that kind of capital. Furthermore, there are significant early withdrawal penalties associated with breaking the blind trust structure." "Take the penalties out of the balance," Ethan said indifferently, "and the credit union can handle it just fine. I've known the branch manager, Samuel O'Malley, since we were in the 4th grade. He knows my name, and he knows my land. I want $5 million wired to my account there, immediately." Preston froze, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. $5 million leaving the branch was a massive blow to their quarterly asset retention metrics. He looked pleadingly at Gregory. "Do it, Preston," Gregory said through gritted teeth. There was no stopping a client from moving liquid funds, and trying to delay it would only open the bank up to massive legal liabilities. "Amount $5 million, Preston whispered as he typed. "Destination, Madison County Farmers Credit Union. Routing." He copied the numbers Ethan's had written down. "Initiating transfer." "Now," Ethan's continued, not missing a beat. "You've got a file on me. Pull it up." Preston quickly switched screens. "I have it." "I have a second mortgage on the farmhouse," Ethan said. "Pay it off, in full, right now, from the remaining trust balance." Preston clicked rapidly. "Processing payoff. Done. The lien will be released within 48 hours. Ethan's nodded slowly. He looked at the two bankers, relishing the absolute shift in gravity within the room. He wasn't done. He thought of his neighbors, the men and women who didn't have a secret windfall, who were currently staring down the same dry dirt, waiting for the bank's vultures to circle. "There's a farm down the road from me," Ethan said. "The Miller—" He stopped himself, remembering a different name. "The Caldwell—" No, not that one either. "The Henderson—" No, the executive's name was Henderson. "The O'Donnell family farm. 200 acres, east side of the county line. Pull up their file," Preston typed frantically. "O'Donnell. Yes, William and Mary O'Donnell. They are severely delinquent. Their file is currently slated for foreclosure processing next month." "Not anymore," Ethan said. "Calculate their entire outstanding debt, mortgage, equipment, seed lines, everything." Preston's eyes widened. "Ethan's, you can't be serious. You are attempting to pay off another party's uncollateralized—" "Calculate it," Ethan's barked. a flash of true anger finally breaking through his stoicism. Preston flinched. It's $412,000. Pay it off, Ethan's commanded. From the trust. And I want a certified letter, overnighted, to William O'Donnell, stating that his farm is free and clear, courtesy of Margaret Fincoln. Gregory Henderson ran a hand through his perfectly styled silver hair, pacing slightly. Ethan's, this is philanthropic recklessness. You are bleeding capital without any tax advantage structuring. It ain't your capital to worry about, Ethan's retorted. Are you typing, Preston? Yes, sir. Paying off O'Donnell accounts in full. Ethan stood in silence as the keys clacked. He felt a strange, terrifying sense of power. For his entire life, the bank had been a looming, shadowy beast, dictating whether he survived or failed. Now he held the beast by the throat. He could see Preston sweating, realizing that Ethan's was systematically dismantling their profitable debt portfolios right in front of them. Are we finished, Mr. Fincoln? Gregory asked coldly, the facade of partnership entirely gone. He was watching millions in assets and profitable, interest-generating debts evaporate. Ethan's reached down and picked up the small, yellowed piece of stationery that bore his wife's handwriting. He folded it carefully and slid it back into his worn leather wallet. Almost, Ethan said. I'm leaving the rest of the money right where it is for now. But I want a new account manager, someone who knows the difference between a soybean and a pinto bean. If I call down here and get Preston Whitmore on the phone, I will walk into this lobby and pull every single dime out of this institution. Do we understand each other, Gregory? Gregory Henderson's jaw tightened so hard, Ethan's could hear the teeth grind. Loud and clear, Mr. Fincoln. Ethan's turned away from the two men and walked toward the heavy glass door. He didn't look back at the panic, the anger, or the shattered arrogance he was leaving in his wake. He pushed the door open and stepped out into the quiet, carpeted hallway of the executive floor. He took the elevator down, walked across the pristine marble of the lobby, and pushed through the glass doors out into the blistering Iowa heat. He walked back to his sputtering, rusty 1998 Ford F250. He climbed inside, the hot vinyl of the seat burning his back, and turned the key. The engine coughed, choked, and finally roared to life. Ethan's put the truck in gear and pulled out of the Midwest Liberty Trust parking lot. He rolled the window down, letting the hot, dusty wind blow through the cab. He had an engine to rebuild, a crop to plant, and for the first time in a long time, he felt the heavy, suffocating weight lift from his shoulders. He looked up at the cloudless blue sky, a small, genuine smile cracking the deep lines of his face. Good job, Maggie, he whispered to the wind. Good job. The drive from the towering glass skyscrapers of Des Moines back to the rolling, sun-baked plains of Madison County usually took Ethan's an hour and a half. Today, the journey felt entirely different. The persistent gnawing anxiety that had sat heavily in his chest for 2 years was gone, replaced by a quiet, steady resolve. The rusted floorboards of the old Ford rattled, but to Ethan's, the engine sounded like a symphony. He didn't drive straight home. Instead, he pulled into the cracked asphalt parking lot of the Madison County Farmers Credit Union. It was a modest, single-story brick building nestled between a hardware store and a diner that smelled perpetually of fried onions and old coffee. There were no marble pillars here, No manicured receptionists. Just a faded awning and a bell that jingled cheerfully when Ethan's pushed the glass door open. "Ethan's, good to see you, you old stubborn mule," a voice boomed from the back. Samuel O'Malley emerged from his small office. Samuel was a stout, balding man in his late 60s, wearing a short-sleeved plaid shirt and a tie that had likely gone out of style during the Reagan administration. He had dirt under his fingernails from his own weekend garden and a genuine, warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Afternoon, Sam," Ethan said, taking off his cap and dusting it against his jeans. "Come on back," Samuel gestured, pouring a cup of pitch-black coffee from a carafe that had been sitting on the warmer since 6 in the morning. He handed it to Ethan's in a styrofoam cup. "What brings you into town? Need to look at extending that line of credit for the seed?" "I talked to the board. We can probably squeeze a little more out for you, given the circumstances." Ethan's took a slow sip of the bitter coffee. "I appreciate that, Sam. I truly do, but I don't need a line of credit. I need to know if a wire transfer came through from Midwest Liberty Trust." Samuel chuckled, walking behind his cluttered wooden desk and sitting down heavily in his squeaky chair. "Midwest Liberty? You actually went down to the belly of the beast. I thought you swore you'd never set foot in that corporate monolith after they bought out Oak Creek." "Didn't have a choice," Ethan's replied calmly. "Check your system, Sam." Samuel adjusted his reading glasses and typed onto a keyboard that was yellowed with age. "All right, let's see here. Wire transfers. Pending." Samuel stopped typing. He leaned closer to the monitor. He took his glasses off, cleaned them on his tie, and put them back on. The silence in the small office stretched. The only sound was the ticking of a promotional clock on the wall. "Ethan's," Samuel said, his voice dropping to a hoarse whisper. All the color had drained from his face. "Ethan's, there is a pending incoming wire here for $5 million. It's flagged for your primary checking account." "Has it cleared?" Ethan's asked, pulling out a small notepad from his breast pocket. "Well, yes. The Federal Reserve routing is complete. It's just waiting on my manual authorization because it tripped every security threshold this little branch has ever seen," Samuel stammered, looking up at the farmer as if he were seeing a ghost. "Ethan's, what did you do? Did you rob the vault down there?" Ethan's allowed a small, rare smile to touch his lips. "Margaret," Samuel blinked, the realization slowly washing over his features. He had known Margaret Finkeln well. "Margaret? But she's been gone 3 years, Ethan's. What kind of secret was that woman keeping?" "The kind that saves the farm," Ethan said softly. "Authorize the wire, Sam. Then, I need you to cut me 2 cashier's checks, one for $22,000 to Wyatt's Implement Repair, the other for $14,000 to Benson Seed and Supply. I've got a combine to rebuild and a field to plant." Samuel didn't ask any more questions. He just nodded, his hands trembling slightly as he clicked the mouse. "You got it, Ethan's. You got it." Topperdief, 10 miles away, on the eastern edge of the county, William O'Donnell was sitting at his worn kitchen table. He was 55, but the stress of the past 2 seasons had aged him a decade. His wife, Mary, was at the stove, quietly stirring a pot of soup, the silence in the house thick with an unspoken, suffocating despair. On the table in front of William was a stack of mail. Most of it was bills, past due notices, and aggressive letters from collection agencies. But on the very top of the pile was a thick, pristine envelope from Midwest Liberty Trust, delivered by a specialized overnight courier just an hour prior. William stared at it. He knew what it was. They had missed their last 3 mortgage payments. The equipment loans were completely in default. The bank had warned them over the phone earlier in the week that the official foreclosure notices would be mailed out by Friday. "You have to open it, Will," Mary said softly, coming up behind him and resting a comforting, warm hand on his shoulder. "We can't ignore it. We have to know how many days we have left to pack." William closed his eyes, a single tear escaping the corner and tracking down his weathered cheek. "4 generations, Mary. My great-grandfather broke this soil with a team of horses, and I'm the one who loses it. I'm the one who failed." "It's the weather, Will. It's not you," she whispered, kissing the top of his head. "Just open it." With shaking hands, William picked up the heavy envelope. He slid his thumb under the flap, tearing it open. He pulled out a stack of heavily watermarked documents. He braced himself for the legal jargon, the demand for the keys, the date of the public auction. He read the top page. He frowned, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. He read it again. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. O'Donnell, this certified correspondence serves as official notification that your outstanding liabilities with Midwest Liberty Trust, including mortgage account number 8849, equipment line number 3312, and agricultural seed loan number 1109, have been paid in full. Enclosed are the finalized deeds of reconveyance and zero balance statements. The liens against your property have been formally released with the county clerk. Your accounts are closed, and you hold the title to your property free and clear. The payoff was initiated via a third-party private trust. Per the remitter's instructions, this action was executed on behalf of the Margaret Finkeln estate." William stopped breathing. He dropped the paper onto the table as if it had caught fire. "Will, what is it?" Mary asked, her voice tight with panic. "How bad is it?" William couldn't speak. He pushed the paper toward her. Mary picked it up, her eyes scanning the neat corporate text. She gasped, her hand flying to cover her mouth. She looked at the zero balance statements. She looked at the deed. "Paid?" Mary choked out, tears instantly flooding her eyes. "Paid in full? Will, it's over $400,000. William stood up from the table, his legs unsteady. He walked to the kitchen window and looked out at his dry, dusty fields. Margaret Finkeln. He remembered her, a quiet, sharp-witted woman who always brought peach cobbler to the county fair. She had passed away years ago, and Ethan's was just as broke as they were, or so everyone thought. "Get your coat, Mary," William said, his voice cracking with an overwhelming tidal wave of raw emotion. "We're going to Ethan's place." By the time William and Mary's truck pulled up the long, gravel driveway of the Finkeln farm, the sky to the west had bruised a deep, heavy purple. The wind had shifted, carrying with it the unmistakable, sharp scent of ozone and damp earth. The drought was breaking. Ethan's was out in the main barn. A massive green John Deere combine sat in the center of the concrete floor, its engine compartment completely gutted. Wyatt, the local mechanic, was up to his elbows in grease, guiding a massive engine block down from a chain hoist while Ethan steadied the chains. William threw the truck into park and scrambled out before the engine even died. He practically ran into the barn, clutching the thick envelope from Midwest Liberty Trust in his fist. Mary followed close behind, weeping openly. Ethan's looked up, wiping a streak of black oil from his forehead with a rag. He saw William's face, pale and streaked with tears. "Hold the line, Wyatt," Ethan's murmured to the mechanic. He stepped away from the machinery and walked toward the entrance of the barn. "Ethan's," William choked out, stopping a few feet away. He held up the papers, his hand shaking violently. "Ethan's. I got this from the bank. It says Margaret." William couldn't finish the sentence. His knees buckled. A grown man, hardened by decades of unforgiving labor, collapsed onto the dusty concrete of the barn floor, weeping with the kind of absolute, profound relief that feels like physical pain. Ethan's moved quickly. He knelt down, putting his heavy, calloused hands on William's shaking shoulders. "Stand up, Will," Ethan said gently, his voice a low, steady rumble. "A farmer doesn't kneel on his own land, and he sure as hell doesn't kneel on mine. Stand up." Mary rushed forward, helping Ethan's pull her husband back to his feet. She threw her arms around Ethan's neck, burying her face in his flannel shirt, not caring about the oil and the dirt. "Thank you," she sobbed. "How can we ever repay you? We'll work for you. We'll give you half our yields." "You won't do any such thing," Ethan said, gently stepping back and holding them both at arm's length. Margaret knew what this community meant. The bank down in the city, they don't see us. They see numbers. They wanted to take your grandfather's dirt, Will. Margaret just made sure they couldn't. "But $400,000, William stammered, wiping his eyes with the back of his sleeve. "Ethan's, where did it come from?" "It came from Patience," Ethan said simply. "And it's gone now. You own your land free and clear. So you go home. You prep your planters. Look at the sky, Will. The rain is coming. We've got a season to catch up on." Outside, the first heavy drops of water began to hit the tin roof of the barn, sounding like a scatter of buckshot. Within seconds, the sky opened up. The torrential downpour hammered the parched earth, soaking into the deep cracks, washing the dust from the air. It was a baptism of the soil. But down in Des Moines, a different kind of storm was brewing. Gregory Henderson sat in his immaculate office, staring at a financial report that made his stomach churn. In a single afternoon, Ethan's Fincon had drained $5 million in liquid capital and liquidated nearly $500,000 in highly profitable, high-interest debt from their agricultural portfolio. And the old man still had nearly $9 million sitting untouched in the blind trust. Preston Whitmore stood in the corner, looking nauseous. "This is unacceptable," Gregory hissed, slamming his hand on the walnut desk. "We cannot allow an uneducated, emotionally volatile geriatric to hemorrhage Tier 1 capital because he suddenly feels philanthropic. If he withdraws the remaining $9 million, my division's quarterly projections will be completely decimated. The board will have my head." "What can we do?" Preston asked nervously. "The money is legally his. The trust reverted to him upon his wife's passing." Gregory's eyes narrowed. "He's 71 years old. He lives alone. He just gave away $400,000 to a neighbor for absolutely no return on investment. That demonstrates a clear lack of financial competency. You want to invoke an elder abuse hold? Preston asked, his eyes widening. Sir, the legal compliance department will require substantial proof that he is mentally unfit to manage his assets. I will provide the proof, Gregory said coldly. We freeze the trust immediately under Section 4A of the Vulnerable Client Protection Act. We send our legal counsel up there tomorrow to demand a psychiatric evaluation before any further funds are dispersed. We tie the money up in probate and compliance reviews for the next 3 years. By then, he'll likely be dead, or he'll give up and let us manage it. Lock the account, Preston. Now. The next morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the farm smelling impossibly fresh and green. Ethan's was sitting on his front porch, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise, when a sleek black Mercedes sedan navigated the muddy, rutted driveway. A man in a sharp gray suit stepped out, carrying a leather briefcase. He looked at the mud on his expensive shoes with deep disgust. He walked up the wooden steps of the porch. Mr. Finkeln? The man asked, producing a business card. I am Mr. Sterling's associate. He paused, remembering his actual name. I am Mr. Vance's. No, apologies. I am David Kensington, Senior Legal Counsel for Midwest Liberty Trust. Ethan's didn't take the card. He just took another sip of his coffee. You're a long way from the marble floors, David. I'm here regarding the Margaret Finkeln Trust, David said, his tone slick and authoritative. The bank has placed an immediate administrative freeze on the remaining $9 million in the account. Ethan's eyes hardened, but his expression remained calm. On what grounds? Under the Vulnerable Client Protection Act, David stated, puffing his chest out slightly. Given the erratic and highly irregular disbursement of funds yesterday, including a massive, uncompensated gift to a third party, the bank has a fiduciary duty to ensure you are of sound mind and not being manipulated. Until you submit to a full medical and psychological evaluation by a bank-appointed physician, the funds are locked. Ethan's chuckled. It was a dark, dry sound. He reached over to the small table next to his rocking chair and picked up a cordless phone. He dialed a local number. Clayton, Ethan said into the receiver. They're here. Yeah, come on out. Ethan's hung up the phone and looked at the corporate lawyer. Margaret was a lot smarter than me, David, but she also left me a journal, detailed exactly how you vultures operate. She told me if I ever touched the money, the bank would try to claim I was crazy to keep it. So, I made a call yesterday afternoon while I was at the credit union. 10 minutes later, a battered, rust-spotted Chevy Tahoe pulled up next to the Mercedes. Out stepped Clayton Briggs, a massive bearded man wearing a rumpled corduroy jacket over a flannel shirt. Clayton was the most feared civil litigator in 3 counties. He didn't care about corporate law. He cared about destroying bullies. Clayton walked up the steps, carrying a thick manila folder. He didn't introduce himself. He just shoved a piece of paper into David Kensington's chest. What is this? David asked, stepping back. That, Clayton boomed, his voice like rolling thunder, is a copy of an injunction filed at 8 a.m. this morning with the Federal District Court. It's also a draft of a press release I'm sending to the Des Moines Register, the Wall Street Journal, and every local news affiliate in the Midwest. David scanned the paper. His arrogant smirk vanished. The headline reads, Midwest Liberty Trust holds deceased woman's fortune hostage. Accuses local hero farmer of insanity for saving neighbor's farm, Clayton recited with a vicious smile. I've already got statements from the O'Donnell family, the local credit union, and the mayor of this town testifying to Mr. Fincoln's absolute mental acuity. Your Section 4A freeze is a fraudulent, malicious attempt to retain capital, which is a direct violation of federal banking regulations. David swallowed hard. Mr. Briggs, we are simply following standard compliance. You are trying to steal from a farmer, Clayton interrupted, stepping so close to David that the lawyer had to lean back over the porch railing. You have exactly 10 minutes to call Gregory Henderson and tell him to release the freeze. If those funds are not fully unlocked and available for wire transfer by 9 a.m., I am going to bury Midwest Liberty Trust in so much bad press and federal litigation that Henderson won't be able to get a job managing a piggy bank. David Kensington looked at Clayton, then at Ethan's, who was quietly sipping his coffee. The lawyer pulled out his cell phone and walked down the steps, his hands shaking as he dialed. 5 minutes later, David walked back to the porch. He looked defeated. The hold has been released. The funds are available. Good, Ethan said, standing up, because I'm transferring the rest of it out today. Tell Gregory I said thanks for the coffee. David got into his Mercedes and sped away, slipping and sliding in the thick mud of the Fincoln driveway. Ethan's looked at Clayton. Appreciate it, Clay. My pleasure, Ethan's, Clayton grinned. I haven't had that much fun since the county fair pie eating contest. What are you going to do with the rest of the money? Ethan's looked out over his fields. The wet earth was ready. I'm gonna plant. Autumn arrived in Madison County with a breathtaking explosion of color. The air turned crisp, carrying the sweet, dusty scent of harvested grain. It was the best yield the county had seen in a decade. The wet spring had given way to a perfect temperate summer. The green John Deere combine, completely rebuilt and humming like a jet engine, rolled through Ethan's fields, cutting the golden stalks of corn and pouring thousands of bushels into the waiting trucks. But Ethan's wasn't the only one celebrating. All across the eastern ridge, the O'Donnell family brought in a record crop, their minds entirely free of the crushing weight of debt. They kept the profits. They fixed their barn. They breathed. In late November, after the final field was cleared and the machinery was washed and stored for the winter, Ethan's drove his old Ford into town. He didn't go to the credit union. He drove to the small, peaceful cemetery on the hill overlooking the valley. He walked through the rows of weathered headstones until he reached a plot marked by a simple, elegant piece of polished granite. Margaret Evelyn Fincoln, beloved wife. Deep roots yield strong harvests. Ethan's knelt in the damp grass. He took off his cap and placed a small, perfect ear of dried golden corn at the base of the stone. We got it out of the ground, Maggie, Ethan's whispered, the wind pulling at his silver hair. It was a good year. He stayed there for a long time, the silence wrapping around him like a warm blanket. He thought about the $14 million. He hadn't bought a new truck. He hadn't bought a mansion or a fancy watch. He still wore the same flannel shirts and the same boots. The money hadn't changed who he was. It had simply allowed him to protect what he loved. In October, Ethans and Clayton had finalized the paperwork for the Margaret Fincoln Agricultural Trust. With the remaining $9 million, Ethans established a private foundation headquartered right there at the Madison County Farmers Credit Union. The foundation's sole purpose was to issue zero-interest emergency loans to independent, family-owned farms facing foreclosure due to drought, machinery failure, or predatory lending. The impact was immediate and devastating to the corporate giants. Within 2 months, Midwest Liberty Trust saw their entire agricultural lending portfolio in Madison and the 3 surrounding counties evaporate. Farmers realized they didn't have to mortgage their souls to Gregory Henderson's algorithms. They could go to Samuel O'Malley, shake a man's hand, and get the help they needed to survive a bad season. The board of directors at Midwest Liberty Trust did not take kindly to the massive permanent loss of revenue. In early November, a brief article appeared in the financial section of the Des Moines Register. It noted a restructuring of executive management at the bank. Gregory Henderson was forced into early retirement. Preston Whitmore was let go entirely, his arrogant reliance on spreadsheets ultimately proving to be his downfall in a world that still required a human touch. Ethan stood up, his knees popping in the cold air. He put his cap back on. He had beaten them. Not with malice, not with underhanded tricks, but with the exact thing they lacked: loyalty to the land and to the people who worked it. Margaret had given him the sword, and he had swung it with perfect, devastating precision. Ethans walked back to his rusty 1998 Ford F250. He climbed in, the engine sputtering its familiar, comforting cough before roaring to life. He drove back toward the farm. The fields were bare now, resting under the pale autumn sun, waiting for the snow to come and blanket them in sleep. He pulled into his driveway, looking at the old farmhouse. It needed a new coat of paint, and the porch steps squeaked, but it was his. It belonged to him, and it always would. Ethans walked up the steps, poured himself a cup of coffee, and sat in his rocking chair. He looked out over the quiet expanse of dirt and sky. He was a wealthy man. But as he took a sip of his coffee and watched a hawk circle lazily in the cold thermals above, he knew that the numbers in the bank account meant nothing compared to this. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. He was a farmer, and the dirt was good. Ethan's Fincoln didn't just save his farm. He used his hidden wealth to break a corrupt system and save an entire community. The Margaret Fincoln Trust stands as a beautiful reminder that true wealth isn't measured by the balance in a corporate vault, but by the roots you plant and the neighbors you lift up. If Ethan's incredible journey of justice and generosity inspired you, smash that like button and share this video. Let us know your favorite moment in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss our next real-life story.